Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat at welcome po sa ika-108 episode ng The Filipino SDG Action Hour. Samahan niyo kami na tumuklas ng isa na naman pong exciting at bagong kaalaman. Our topic for today is DNA, a powerful catalyst of change for a brighter tomorrow. At sa tulong po ng ating speaker this afternoon, we will discover a fascinating world measured in nanometer and how knowledge on DNA can be used as a tool for a brighter tomorrow. And our speaker today is a distinguished Filipino scientist specializing in forensic DNA technology and human population genetics. She earned her Bachelor of Science in Biology from Macquarie University in Australia in 1993 and completed her PhD in microbiology at the University of New South Wales in 1999. And upon returning to the Philippines, she became the lead and head of the DNA Analysis Laboratory at the University of the Philippines Natural Sciences Research Institute. And in this role, she has been instrumental in promoting the use of DNA technology for justice, particularly in criminal cases and in studying the genetics of the Philippine populations. She also received numerous prestigious awards for her contribution to science and society, including Outstanding Young Scientist from the Philippine National Academy of Science and Technology,
Yeah,
the
paki-on mo.
Science Academy for the Developing World, and the 10 Outstanding Women in the Nation Service Award, and many more. And in the year 2011, she was named one of the first two national fellows of L'Oreal UNESCO Women in Science program, and her work has significantly advanced forensic science in our country,
Yeah.
aiding criminal justice and disaster victim identification. So this afternoon, let's all welcome Academician Maria Corazon de Hungria.
Hello, good afternoon, sirs and ma'ams. Um, Thank you very much for the invitation. Can I start sharing?
Yes po, ma'am.
Yeah, okay. Okay. All right. So thank you very much for the invitation. I slightly changed the topic, the title of the presentation to forensic para mas appropriate. The title being Forensic DNA for the Protection of Persons, Communities, and Institutions. These are all our contact details at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. All right. So at the beginning, let's just start with a definition of what forensic DNA analysis is, which is the focus of this presentation. Forensic DNA analysis is the scientific process of examining and comparing DNA samples with one of two objectives. It is either to identify individuals, and this is what we call direct identification, or two, to establish biological relationships in the context of legal investigations, such as in relationship testing, paternity testing, maternity testing, kinship testing, etc. In the Philippines, we've got three main forensic DNA laboratories. We have the National Bureau of Investigations, which was established in 1998. In 2000, the Philippine National Police DNA Lab was established. But the first one was actually established at the University of the Philippines, Diliman, at the Natural Sciences Research Institute in 1996. This is a photo of our team taken last year, showing that most of our researchers and scientists are actually younger than the general population. So for the students in the audience, at some point, we would like to invite you to join our team. So for this particular presentation, I was asked to target one or several of the SDGs. And I think the most appropriate SDGs to target for this presentation is SDG 3, which is good health and well-being, and SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. Reading through, I would like to adopt instead of the definition that was found in the SDG page on health, I would like to adopt the WHO definition of health, which is stated as the state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. This is in the Constitution of WHO. The enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health is one of the fundamental rights of every human being without distinction of race, religion, political belief, economic, or social condition. So when we deal with health, which is what you will see in the presentation, hindi lang po tayo mag-uusap ukol sa sakit or sa vaccine or etc. That's not part of forensic DNA analysis. But what we're going to talk about is the overall well-being of an individual in terms of being able to resolve crimes, being able to obtain justice, being able to prove that something has actually occurred, and then to get those who perpetrated these crimes into proper litigation. Furthermore, the health of all peoples is fundamental to the attainment of peace and security. So outside of the self, there's personal well-being, whether it's mental, it's social, personal health, etc., but also collectively as that of the community. So health of all peoples is fundamental. The attainment of peace and security is dependent on the fullest cooperation of individuals and states. The extension to all peoples of the benefits of medical, psychological, and related knowledge is essential to the fullest attainment of health. So then I go particularly focus on one big area of forensics and forensic investigation, which is the category or the field of sexual assault investigation. In late last year, it was reported by UNICEF that 370 million girls and women were subjected to rape or sexual assault. And that is an average about 1 in 8 uh, girls and women experience rape or sexual assault even before the age of 18. Checking that, well, that was the global information, global statistics, but here I'm reporting the data that was included in the Women and Children Protection Unit's report in 2023, wherein the number of individuals that reported abuse of some form shown here. The most common is physical assault, followed by sexual assault. 1,534 physical assault and 1,204 sexual assault. This is for adult women. Okay, I am move forward. And however, when we're looking at 17-year-old and younger, defined as children, we see that the sexual abuse is much more or significantly more than the other types of abuses. So sexual abuse totals 6,338 compared to physical abuse, 1,062, emotional, psychological abuse, 437, and neglect, 434. So there's considerable concern in having these high numbers in the case of children, female children. Actually, they are males here. Children overall in the Philippines in the year 2021. And looking through the different years of the reports, this is about the average number that had been reported over a period of 3 or 4 years. Breaking down the child physical and sexual abuse cases by age in the same annual report, we see that as young, here shown in pink is physical abuse, shown in orange is sexual abuse. On the y-axis is the number, on the x-axis are the ages. So we see that from 0 to 3 years old, there were 258 reports of sexual abuse in 2021. In 4 to 6 years old, there were 552. For 7 to 9 years old, there were 637 cases, 1,137 in 10 to 12. And the most common is that of the age 13 to 16, reaching as high as 2,343 for a single year alone. And then we have more, 1,342 for children 16 to 17 years old. So this is a substantial number of reported cases. I'm in conversations with the Child Protection Network, with Dr. Bernadette Madrid and Dr. Merly Tan. They said that these are the numbers for the reported cases. Pero maraming individuals, maraming bata, hindi nakakapag-report ng abuse due to a number of reasons. Challenges, there are many challenges in investigating cases involving minors. Delayed reporting if at all. So marami po yung mga bata, alam natin, tinatakot ng perpetrator, huwag kang magsusumbong, sasaktan kita, sasaktan ko pamilya mo, etc., etc. So either hindi na sila nagsusumbong or magsusumbong pero masyado ng late. Emotional burden associated with reporting such as shame dahil sa nangyari and then fear. Dependence on an adult to seek assistance. Many of the cases that had been reported to the Child Protection Network involved perpetrators who have a protection function for the children, such as fathers, brothers, grandfathers, uncles, etc., or even neighbors. Therefore, the child is dependent on the perpetrator to provide the money to be able to even go to one of the centers. So hindi sila nakakapag-report agad or nakakapag-report at all. And then for the much younger children, inability to identify offender. For the 0 to 2 years old, many of those, a number of those cases were actually reported by the mother or by relatives who have noticed something very different from the usual behavior of those children. And then an examination was done, medical examination was done, and the conclusion of abuse was determined. And then one of the other challenges is that in the collection of DNA, the smaller children uh, provide much less DNA because of their physical anatomy. So ito po parte ng I'll show you po some of the work that we've done over the years. So we've been working with the Child Protection Network since the early 2000s, so that's over 20 years or so now. And what we've been discovering is that one major predicament of doctors is wala silang pangkolekta ng samples pag may batang pumunta sa kanila, usually in the early hours of the day. So a child will go to the clinic, say 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning. They will say something had happened. And then in many, if not most of the hospitals do not actually have rape kits, that was the former name, or the sexual assault investigation kit, which is what it is called now, SAC or SAIC. And so what we've done, and we've reported this in the Acta Medica Filipina article of maybe 2 years ago, how over the years, what we've done with medical doctors in the Child Protection Network, these are the doctors, is that we validated a sample collection kit for sexual assault involving sterile coated tubes. We've got the pre-labeled envelopes with appropriate labels so that the work of the doctors are facilitated. We've got a legally validated, tested, critiqued, informed consent form when we work with the public authority's office and prosecutors to go over this informed consent form, a sample collection form that documents the custody of all samples from the time samples had been collected from a patient to the time that the samples had been submitted to a laboratory for testing and subsequent presentation in court. And then all of those. So there's an article here. This is a freely accessible document in Acta Medica Filipina. The development of a local sexual assault investigation kit, the Philippine experience. The second article here, which is a special article, is an actual case. It's an actual case. Okay, thank you po. Um, so this is an actual case report, one of the landmark cases in the Philippines, that was reviewed and affirmed by the Supreme Court on one of the cases we did early in 2003, 2004, 2005. A retrospective look on the use of DNA evidence in an actual sexual assault investigation in the Philippines. This is the case of People versus Joel Yatar, that we actually worked on in the laboratory and testified on. So for those who interested, there's an actual case report for that. So now briefly, through the years, we've actually did some pilot studies. Paano ba talaga makakatulong ang DNA sa pag-iimbestiga ng rape cases or sexual assault cases? We pilot studied at the very beginning 39 cases involving children. And what we did here is that we tried to isolate from those swabs collected by medical doctors from a patient. And then that DNA collected from a patient who allegedly have had contact with another person. Pagka meron pong ganyan, sexual contact, ang makukuha dun sa DNA, sa swab, sa DNA ng swab, would be a mixture. The DNA of the patient and the DNA of the person that had contact. These swabs that we analyzed were actually from the internal genitalia, so very internal to the patient. And all the patients we examined here, 39 cases, were female children under 18. So what we targeted in this particular pilot study was to determine if we can detect the Y chromosome or the male-specific DNA in the mixture. We tabulated that, compared it with the microscopic detection of sperm. The sperm histology is very distinct, the head and the tail. And then in the 39 cases, 6 were positive. Sperms were observed and reported by the medical technologist. 21 cases were negative. It doesn't mean that there was no contact, but the histology of the sperm cells, hindi po nakita yung sperm cell under the microscope. And then 12 did not have any documentation of sperm detection in the documents that were submitted to us. 18 of the 39 cases, in-interview yung mga bata, whether they felt, and of course, these are special ways of questioning those children. 18 reported positive for internal ejaculation. They felt it. 5 negative, based on their narrative to the nurse or the social worker. And then 16 didn't have any data on internal ejaculation. 28 reported that they've washed themselves after contact. 8 said no, they did not wash. And then 3 did not have any narrative. When we conducted DNA testing of those 39 cases, 20 of the female children had Y chromosome in the samples that were collected from their internal genitalia, confirming the statement of those patients that there was sexual contact. 19 were negative for male DNA, and many of this actually were children, very, very small children, and the DNA there was not much DNA that we could extract from the sample. So it doesn't mean that there was no contact, except that there was no DNA evidence to prove contact. And then there was no unknown. So through the years, we've tried to test the different steps involved in sexual assault investigation. Ito po yung sinabi natin, YSCR analysis, detection and objective confirmation of child sexual abuse. Most of the patients that go to the Child Protection Network or the Women and Child's Desk majority are female. So one way to simplify the analysis is to try to look for the male-specific DNA in those samples. This becomes more complex kung ang pasyente po ay lalaki. So hindi na tayo, pag babae, hindi tayo nagme-mixture analysis kasi pag babae ang pasyente, hahanapin namin yung Y chromosome. Pero pag lalaki din yung pasyente, lalaki din ang perpetrator, we have to do mixture analysis, which is more complex. Here we did YSCR analysis of 154 actual cases, and over 60% of those were positive for male DNA. So very strong case if those cases reached Philippine courts. We did some preliminary presumptive and confirmatory semen tests without even DNA testing and tried to determine a workflow, which we actually suggested in this particular paper that we've published several years ago. So for the science majors in the audience, these are very specifics, a flow chart, a workflow that we use in the laboratory to actually determine what step we will do depending on this question, what answer we get for each step. So if, for example, these are the specimens we've analyzed with feces, yes or no. If it is with yes, it is important that the sample is stored at 4 degrees. If it is no, room temperature. Ma'am, bakit po may feces? We observed in our experience, we observed feces in male patients. Kasi po pag ang pasyente ay male, the swabs are from the anus. And then with the anal swabs, those are children, there were a lot of contamination of feces. And with those feces, we have microbial growth, fungal growth, etc. if it is not properly stored at room temperature. So here we make those determinations depending on what we observed from the earlier step. And then we conduct all this different. I won't go through the entire flow chart now, but if anybody's interested in the audience, we can further develop. But so these are the rape kit samples. After all that, there is extraction. If there's a lot of male DNA, excessive female component, then we target the Y chromosome. If there is not excessive female component, balance lang yung male at female, we actually test for autosomal and Y chromosome. And there is reason for that. If anybody's interested, then we can go further. The third stage is data interpretation. This is the hardest. Once we generate our data from the machines, we've got our electropherograms, our graphs, and our peaks. How do we analyze so that we can differentiate the main contributor and the minor contributor? Usually, the main contributor, yung pinakamaraming DNA, would be the patient, the female patient, kasi katawan niya yun. And then we have the minor contributor, usually the perpetrator, kasi siya yung pumasok or siya yung hindi niya katawan yun. However, in very small children, we've detected some main contributors to be the perpetrator because of the anatomy of those children. So we do all this different analysis, different types of analysis, with the objective being simple. Who is the major contributor? Who is the minor contributor? Separate them, and then we will compare those profiles with the reference profile from the victim and from the suspect or suspects. Ito po, this is outside the Child Protection Network, opposite UPPGH emergency room. And we've actually been continuously working with the Child Protection Unit in PGH. They've been providing us with samples. Of course, those children and the legal guardians have consented to the analysis of their samples. And what we've done in the last 3 years, under a grant from the Philippine Council for Health Research and Development and DOST, is to try to test if the archived sexual assault cases, which we have biobanked since we started this work with the Child Protection Unit 20 years ago, are we able to analyze those biobank samples in order to generate good profiles given the improved technologies now? So these are just some of our reports. And it is interesting because we found out that we've had several cases, two very interesting cases, where samples were collected from children. One that I particularly remember now is a 19-year-old case. So the case, the contact, the abuse happened 19 years ago. A 12-year-old child went to the Child Protection Unit in PGH, had herself examined, samples were collected. We analyzed the sample last year, and we were able to generate a full DNA profile from a 19-year-old case involving a 12-year-old minor. Unfortunately, the minor did not go back to CPU, and we don't have a suspect reference profile. But we do have the data, the narrative of the child as to who she suspected, or who she said actually did the abuse, but we don't have any samples, so we could not compare with the non-victim DNA that we generated last year. But these are all using the later technologies now. So one of the major things also that we've been doing in our work in our laboratory is um, coming up with all these different methodologies and data, and trying to contribute those material for policy formulation. And in 2000, we did this for the rule on DNA evidence. We started meeting with the Philippine Judicial Academy, the research group, led by then Chancellor Marfina. I forgot the last name, but the Philippine Judicial Academy. And then what we've done with the Philippine Judicial Academy is to formulate the framework of policies, which eventually was turned into the rule on DNA evidence, promulgated by the Supreme Court in 2007. So there are several parts. This is also accessible online, but I pointed some of the key parts of the rule, such as the assessment of the probative value of DNA evidence, reliability of DNA testing method, DNA testing results, post-conviction DNA testing, confidentiality and preservation of DNA evidence. All of these sections were formulated based on data that we generated in our laboratory, and also in Philippine jurisprudence. One of the major questions here that was asked during the discussions is how can DNA evidence be actually used in Philippine courts? What are the internal safeguards to make sure that those samples were collected properly, that the methods used to analyze them were of international standards and reliable? What do those DNA testing results mean, and how these DNA testing results be used in cases of potential wrongful conviction? In the latter part of the rule on DNA evidence, it's actually the Supreme Court warned, just precautionary, and stated that the High Court in Vallejo likewise laid down standards to be considered in assessing its probative value, while acknowledging that DNA forensic analysis, if properly utilized by the bench and bar, can contribute significantly in helping to solve many disputes and assist in the courts. In the delivery of justice, the Supreme Court is likewise aware that the indiscriminate and wholesale acceptance of DNA evidence, which is inherently influential and compelling, can result in even graver injustice. So ang ibig sabihin nito is, maganda nga ang DNA is one of the most powerful tools for identification, but we also need to keep on strengthening the science behind the analysis such that we know we're doing the right procedures. It is reliable. Kasi paminsan o maraming beses, and I guess for the judges and the lawyers or the non-scientists in the audience, mahirap malaman kung kailan nagkamali kami. Bakit? Very technical po kasi yung DNA testing results. And unless you know what is happening, you may be led to believe that everything is all right. But sometimes we can make mistakes. And so how do we police ourselves in order to correct the mistakes before those mistakes become a platform or could cause wrongful arrests or even worse, wrongful convictions? So this is po DNA analysis workflow. This is just a standard molecular biology workflow. Whatever sample we get, we analyze, whether it's from buccal swab, whether it's from blood spots in a crime scene, whether it's from bone cysts of skull that was submitted for DNA analysis. The human remain could not be identified, and this is one of the samples that were submitted, and we had to use the bone DNA the bone material to extract DNA. So there are different protocols that have been validated over the years in order to extract DNA from different types of samples. Once extracted, one needs to quantify, determine how much DNA is there so that we are able to evaluate a strategy, formulate a strategy for analysis. And then we either do fragment analysis or sequencing in order to generate the DNA profile. So marami pong gamit yung DNA profile for the ones that like watching forensic crime shows. Sometimes they say, take this profile to CODIS. CODIS is the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Combined DNA Index System sa states. And this is a DNA database of criminal offenders and suspects that they maintain at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level in the US. So there are different ways of handling the DNA that had been obtained from the crime scene and the DNA of suspects. So what is a criminal DNA database? We've already alluded to this. It is powerful for investigation. Nakikita natin sa CSI, pag may crime scene, mag-generate ng DNA profile. Yung DNA profile from the crime scene will be compared directly to a suspect, kung merong suspect. Paano kung walang suspect? Kung walang suspect, dinadala yung DNA profile and compared to an existing criminal DNA database. Ang tanong doon, yung profile na nando sa crime scene, na-detect na ba siya in other crimes? And then if so, in the other crimes, was there a person that was identified based on all other evidence that had been submitted? So very powerful for identification. If there is a suspect, either from the current investigation or from former investigation, this actually accelerates investigation. Kasi the question of who is potentially answered and is a good start for an investigation. It's very difficult to investigate if we do not have a suspect. Saan tayo maghahanap? Also, having a criminal DNA database to a certain extent prevents wrongful conviction because the investigation is already being carried through using data, either DNA and inclusive of the metadata around the crime investigation, to actually catch uh, potential perpetrator and not get a person that was not involved in the crime. So prevent wrongful conviction. In the Philippines, for several years, this is actually an article in 2019 where the Philippines has been trying to legislate a DNA database law. Actually, the first one was in 2001, I think, with then Senator Onasan to come up with DNA legislation on how DNA is going to be used in court, how a DNA database should be established. But for over 24 years, we have not passed that DNA database law for many reasons. One of which is the wariness of potential abuse, concerns about the management, security, and access to the sample biobank and database of DNA profiles, which have been raised by human rights advocates, including the Philippine Commission on Human Rights. In fact, in this report by Unisys Security Index in 2018, the Philippines shows the highest level of concern over security issues. Kasi po pag nagkaroon tayo ng sample, the actual biological sample, and we have DNA profiles. So both of them are biobanked yung biological samples, database yung DNA profiles. Those, if not properly protected or safeguarded, could actually be potential platforms for abuse. Either the samples could be accessed and planted in other crimes. So yan yung tinatawag nating planting of evidence. Or the database could be hacked and manipulated such that those DNA profiles would come up in searches which are not related to the people involved. So there needs to be, in those legislation, there needs to be safeguards to protect those potential abuse of the biobank and the database. So, and then this is what we were talking about, the biobank of biological DNA samples. So this question, if anybody's interested, can also be a whole field of conversation. So what are the ethical concerns? I've tried to summarize it here. First of all, consent and privacy. So collection from suspects. In other countries, the UK at some point in particular, we're collecting samples from arrestees. Hindi pa convicted, nagkaroon lang ng konting, maski traffic violation, kinokolektahan ng sample, dini-database na sila. And forever, na kasama na yung sample at yung DNA profile sa database, which are searched for every crime that happened in the UK at that time. So, how are we going to get those in the Philippines? Ang tanong is, how are those samples going to be collected from suspects? Paano kung si suspect ayaw niya magbigay ng sample? How much force, in quotation,
But
how much force can we
leader, walang leader, no? I mean, excluded yung leader, nakatalig. Parang Dr. Quack Quack. Okay po.
All right. How are those samples going to be collected from suspects? How much force? And then, of course, the newer questions are the databases searches, such as familial searching and genealogical searches. So I've pulled here a bit more of what mama na sinasabi niyo na familial searches. One thing with databases, once they are data banked there, in the US, for example, what they've done is yung CODIS database is composed of at least 13 different genes or DNA markers. Now, if a DNA profile from a crime scene doesn't match completely the 13 that were searched in the database, ibig sabihin, hindi ito yung saktong tao na gumawa ng crime. What the FBI was doing was kung hindi saktong 13, they may decrease the stringency of the search, and and get profiles that actually match maski konti, like 13, kung hindi 13, 12, 11, 10. And what happens there is that if those stringency are decreased, then they will generate suspects that are potential close relatives, kaya familial, close relatives to the person that has that DNA profile in the crime scene, which means that there would be surveillance of families or relatives of the persons that are in the database. So ang nangyari nun, and nangyari pa rin ngayon, is that the searches are not only monitoring the actual people that are in the database, but are also monitoring families of those already in the database. And that has a lot of legal issues in terms of surveillance of individuals in the community. So this is what I was talking about. Familial searching, a specialist forensic DNA profiling service using the national database to identify unknown offenders via their relatives. And this was a report the UK experienced. There's another field which is even more in-depth, which is what we call genetic genealogical testing or searching, which helps now. The US actually uses this to generate potential suspects using a database search. So before, ang ginagamit lang with familial searching are those in the CODIS database or in the criminal database. Now, hindi ko alam kung I think maraming tao na sa Pilipinas ginawa, nagsasubmit tayo ng DNA to actually determine where our ethnicity or ancestry is. So like the GEDmatch or other volunteer databases that were created not so much for investigation, but for genealogical ancestry testing. What has happened in other countries is those particular volunteer databases had been used by law enforcement to identify suspects. And there were clear issues in terms of the consent of those people in the database, individual volunteers in the database, for their DNA profile to be used for criminal searches. So there's a lot of forensic genealogy, bioethics questions in those type of searches. In the Philippines, we have not done this because we don't have a law yet and we don't have an established DNA forensic database. But again, we should be worried that this could eventually be used in our criminal investigation. And we should have the proper legislation and safeguard to be able to control or regulate these types of activities. We talked about potential wrongful convictions. We submitted an issue report on the Innocence Project Philippines network. If anybody's interested, this is all readily available. What happens here, this is the gym in the National Penitentiary. With the Free Legal Assistance Group quite a number of years ago, we have been working to identify potential wrongful convictions. These are individuals that have lined up to talk to our volunteers, law students, and lawyers to try to find assistance for their cases to be reopened because of their claim that they have been wrongfully convicted. Unfortunately, in many of these cases that we interviewed over that period, many of those did not have samples collected during criminal investigation. Wala po kaming makuhang ebidensya where we could extract DNA so that we could potentially reopen the case for post-conviction DNA testing. So this was more a legal issue at this stage rather than a post-conviction DNA case. Also, we don't have too much time to discuss this, but we need to have bias and equity representing the underrepresented. So there are two different types of databases that need to be established when we are doing forensic investigations. One is the criminal database. This criminal database contains the DNA profiles of offenders, of suspects, criminals. So that's why it's called a criminal database. Pero yung isang area po, isang type ng database is what we call a population database. This contains volunteer DNA profiles, and we've got that at the DNA analysis in NSRI and UP. And we use it to determine what is the genetic landscape or genetic profiles of the Filipino population. Kasi kailangan po natin maintindihan ang genetics ng tao, ng populasyon natin sa Pilipinas para malaman natin kung paano tayo nagkakapare-pareho at paano tayo nagkakaiba. I'll give you a very specific example why this is important. If, for example, there's a criminal investigation and there's eyewitness testimony, sasabihin ng isa, manong-manong police, ninakawan po ako. Anong nakita mo? Anong itsura nung nagnakaw sa'yo? And then the person will say, sir, itim po ang buhok niya. Black hair is a characteristic that is very common in the Philippine population and is not ideal to be used for forensic investigation. It doesn't individuate persons to allow investigators to identify. So hair color is not useful. So again, when we are determining which forensic DNA markers is useful for identification, we need to understand what the common DNA profiles are in the Philippine population, which is different from the Germans, different from the Americans, different from other populations, particularly of the North Americans, etc. Maybe more similar to the Southeast Asian populations. But again, we need to come up with our own population reference database. And we need to actually be inclusive in the strategy to establish this population database because the Philippines has mainstream populations, Tagalog, Ilocano, Bisaya, etc. But we also have over 110 ethno-linguistic communities, indigenous peoples, that need to be represented in a reference population database. And those samples are much more difficult to collect because many of those communities are geographically isolated and are have their own cultural traditions that we need to be more sensitive about and incorporate in the way we interact with them and collect requests for volunteers for their population. So we're talking about the Bajaus, the Aitas, the Agtas, the Mangyan, such as the Alangan, Hanunoo, etc., etc. Those different groups are also Filipinos and therefore must be represented in a reference population database. Otherwise, our calculations, statistical calculations of matches will not be accurate. There might be a skewness in our calculations if we do not represent all potential populations in the Philippines. So again, if the DNA from evidence suspect match, we need to be able to compare to determine how rare these DNA profiles are from mainstream populations and indigenous peoples with the appropriate safeguards for human participant protection. So one of the other things that we are also requiring is that we need to be able to include those samples provided that we observe ethical regulations in order to protect the data privacy of each volunteer and their communities. So what are our recommendations? We need to have criminal databasing that is regulated by a DNA law. At the moment, we don't have any, although we know that law enforcement, PNP, NBI, they maintain a database based on their cases, but this is not yet a national database. strategize the collection of biological samples. I've been evaluating several bills that have gone through Congress and the Senate, and there has not been a very strategic selection of which crimes to include. For your information, a DNA profile that we do in our lab at the moment is costing us about 65,000 pesos per profile or more, depending on the type of sample that had been submitted. So if we're going to come up, of course, we get that the cost will decrease if we go in bulk. However, it still is a very costly strategy. Therefore, we need to come up with a strategic phase um, um, s- uh, protocol in order to build our database. There were some suggestions which I've already critiqued in the past. There were a couple of bills that suggested to include children and street beggars in a national database for criminal investigations. And I raised the issue in Congress as to the inclusion of children and street beggars. Are we collecting samples from the children and street beggars to return them back to their families? Or are we treating those children and street beggars as potential criminals such that they are already included in a database? And of course, in the critique, I recommended if we have the money, which we don't, but if we have the money to include those children and street beggars profile in a database, why can we not put those money with the Department of Social Welfare or Department of Education in order to educate these children and prevent them from committing crime? That is protecting our citizens and our communities and our institutions rather than treating them as potential criminals. So stakeholder collaboration to maximize limited resources. We need to partner with universities and other agencies. My lab in UP Diliman, we've been trying to do a range of different researchers, but I only have a staff of 8 people. And of course, the job orders is another 10 or 12. There is so much to do in forensic DNA research and extension work that we would really love to partner with other universities and other agencies. So if anybody is open to do this type of work, we are open to conversations and partnerships. A reference population database, because these are volunteers providing the DNA profiles, in my determination, in my opinion, has to be university based. Any reference population database should not be in law enforcement because these databases do not have profiles of criminals or offenders. And for the protection, data privacy of those individuals, it is much better to base them in an educational institution. Personal recommendation. To provide safeguards to ensure data integrity, protocols for data and sample handling and storage. So there would be samples that are data banked, which could potentially be subjected to abuse. There are protocols which can be used to prevent those abuse of planting evidence by actually putting those samples instead of liquid form for the biologists there, we can actually store them in solid form. And therefore, it would be more difficult to plant them in other crime scenes. And that is my recommendation in terms of biobanking samples from offenders or whatever. So that's one integral safeguard. And then for the database, we have been suggesting, hindi pa po kinakagat, pero we've been suggesting that if there's going to be a national database, there should be mirroring of that database such that there would be 2 sites which has the database, maybe NBI and PNP, etc. That if there is hacking in one database, for us to be able to determine if there was such an incident, we can compare it with a second mirror database and determine if everything is up to scratch or something has actually happened. So these are types of safeguards that must be included in the law. And we're open to contributing to those types of discussions. So to end, again, this is some different topics that we've been discussing with different agencies. We've been advocating in order to address SDG 3, good health and well-being. Not only the pathogenesis of disease, we're not medical doctors, but when we talk about good health, we're talking about the physical, personal well-being of every individual, of protect potential victims from being victimized again, protect individuals from being victimized, protect individuals from being falsely accused. And then if we do this, we are protecting the persons, we are protecting the communities, and we are creating stronger institutions. So to end, allow me to reflect on the last but very important challenge. I've summarized this in doing forensic science in the Philippines. It is the need for forensic scientists of all agencies, law enforcement, private institutions, and universities to recognize and value the social impact of our work. When we talk about DNA, it's not just being in a laboratory doing our experiment generating DNA profiles. I always tell my team at the DNA analysis lab, when you're holding an Eppendorf tube with a DNA sample, not to look at the liquid as liquid alone, but to see the faces of the people we are trying to help. We need to remain apolitical and stick to the core values of a true scientist: objectivity, ingenuity, and excellence, leaving no stone unturned because we recognize that underneath the science that we do are the lives of real people, many of whom are desperately calling to us for help. Scientists need to share our knowledge and passion to find order where there is none, to find creative solutions to seemingly hopeless situations, and to discover the common and shared humanity across individual diversities manifested in different social statuses, spiritual beliefs, languages, cultures, and ways of life. Thank you and have a good day.
Salamat din po, Doc. At hindi po ako nagkamali. Totoo nga po na yung aking hula, umpisa pa lang
Mahirap
na
po.
magkakaroon tayo ng isang
But,
napakaganda at insightful na. Salamat po, Doc. Ito po, palas na lang po talaga. Ano po yung inyong pwedeng sabihin sa ating mga attendees dito? Ah, paki-invite po sila, ma'am, in case interested po sila ng pag-aralan po ang forensic science. Paano po mag-enroll po sa inyo?
Kami po sa Natural Sciences Research Institute, hindi po kami a degree granting. We're really, the whole institute is research. However, what we're working out now is that there are possibilities of internship. We're trying to work about, we've got collaborators, etc., that have been requesting for internships, maski lang for their grad or graduate level. We're exploring those with memorandum of agreements, una. And then pangalawa, with the support of the Philippine government, nagsiset up na ng Forensic Science Institute sa UP Manila. The memorandum of agreement was signed last year with Dr. Raquel Fortun and Monash University. So the Australian government is helping us by supplying Australian experts to help us build our forensic institute. With the leadership of Dr. Fortun. Dr. Madrid is there. I'm also in that team. And then we're coming up, we've also been asked by the Commission on Higher Education to re-examine or formulate to help the SCHED programs on forensic science. So there are moves to improve forensic science education in the Philippines. Now, for those who are interested in the field of forensic genetics, ang usually tinatanong sa akin, particularly I was in Pisay the other week, Ma'am, anong kailangan namin gawin para maging molecular scientist? Ang unang sabi ko sa kanila, high school kayo, mag-aral kayong maigi. Kasi pag hindi nyo alam kung ano yung kailangan nyong gawin, if we don't know what we're doing, we can't do. So you have to study hard. Then when you go into an undergrad, you do as a field in the pure sciences, biology, molecular biology, those chemistry, those fields are very important. But it has to be hardcore science first before the application of the science. Forensic is an application. So before one can apply, one needs to understand the science before the application. And then we can apply. So
Maraming
yun
salamat
po.
po, Doc. NS Cruz, meron po kayong gustong sabihin? Ma'am, nakamute po tayo.
Maraming salamat for your very interesting presentation at marami kaming natutunan sa inyong sa itong guesting mo dito sa SDG Action Hour. And nanghinayang ako at hindi ka namin naimbitahan noon pa. Dapat sana noon pa para, because I think it's very important din tama yung relevant siya sa peace, justice, and strong institutions eh. Dito natin makikita na importante. Kung pwede nga sana yung lahat ng ating mga concerns about peace, justice, and strong institutions pwedeng gamitan ng DNA testing.
Opo.
Yun lang, oh. And thanks for pitching in. Kahit nabiglaan na, alam nyo ba, nabiglaan naming inimbita si Cora and siya, willing naman na kasi yung guest for today was Laura David na may emergency lang sa pamilya and Cora uh, willingly pitch in. Hindi
Alam mo
tumanggi.
naman, Ma'am, hindi kita mahihindian. Natural scientist, Luli, it's very difficult to say no to you.
At kahit po biglaan po yung pag-ibita po ni Enes Cruz kay Doc,
Oo,
nabigyan po rin
ang
po
ganda
tayo ng
ng talk niya.
napakabaganda at insightful na presentation. So hindi po nasayang ang ating Biyernes sa linggo na ito. At maraming salamat po uli, Doc. Sana pag po may time po uli, mabigyan niyo po kami ng oras para maging guest po uli ng aming programa. At sa ating po mga tagapanood at attendees, maraming salamat sa pagsama sa amin. At makita po ulit tayo next week, Friday, same place, same channel. And you all enjoy the weekend.